recording when you would like to start.
Okay. What am I starting with? Like the evolution of...
Yeah, maybe talk about exactly like how you make the paintings, where it's coming from, and then if students have questions.
Okay, well, let's see. I'll take you back to the very, very, very beginning. As a professional artist, I started kind of from an angle of portraiture and all that stuff. As an undergraduate, I was very interested in kind of social issues and that kind of thing. And then as a graduate student, I actually specialized in art forgery. So I was making forgeries of artworks that were originals and attributing them to known artists as a way of arguing for the legitimacy of the forged artwork based on its aesthetic value. And then I moved to New York, and being a compulsive people watcher, I think, was really the thing that gave rise to this body of work. It seemed so obvious, like, oh, there's all these like faces on the train, why hasn't somebody come along and painted them? And so I was dating my wife at that point, and she was like, well, why don't you just do it? So I did, and originally we were actually both gonna do the series. She was starting to paint as well, but she has a career, so she's set. But so yeah, that's really how it started, and I would sit on the train, and I had my first smartphone ever. I was about 4 years late to the party with smartphones. And for that matter, the first smartphone that I got was actually the first phone that had a camera on it. So I would sit there and pretend to text and very carefully take photos of people if they caught my eye for some reason or whatever. And then I would take the photos home and dump them and process them in Photoshop and Bridge and all that stuff. Each photo, I think there's an inaccuracy on the piece of paper that's by the door. They're not composited, but they are manipulated. So they're cropped and they're color corrected. And then I work from them as though working from life. So I have them up on a monitor next to me, and I'm painting here. So that's basically it. Yeah. Questions?
I know that it says that like you don't ask permission or anything.
That's right.
But is like consent like a moral issue for you? Because like especially if you have the picture of the children, and that's
yes.
like kind of a thing, you know?
Yeah. That's actually it's funny that you mentioned that, because some of these people I would see multiple times. Like this guy, who is not Cornel West, by the way. I would see him every morning riding the C train, and I used to take that train to work. And a few months ago, a friend emailed me or texted me a photo of him. He had seen him on the train. He's like, hey, you should paint this guy. And I was like, I totally already did paint that guy. But these two guys, I discovered that they live in my neighborhood, and then I was at the library one day with my son, and I saw them there, and they had their names on their backpacks, and now I know their names. Which for me is a terrible kind of crossing the line, crossing the threshold, breaking the fourth wall, whatever you want to call it. It seems invasive, and it seems like a terrible intrusion upon their intimacy. But more importantly, for me, you know, once the photograph turns into a painting, it takes on a life of its own, and these people are now fiction. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the reasons that I don't feel it's not a moral issue. It's a totally artistic issue.
Okay.
To answer your question, it would feel like I'm destroying the artwork if I get to know the person. Mm-hmm. And being the selfish artist that I am, the artwork's more important. Ask me anything. Yeah.
Did anybody ever catch you taking a picture of them?
He might have.
He was looking at that one.
Yeah, as you can see, he's the only one making eye contact. She made eye contact at one point, but it wasn't clear that she was making eye contact because I was taking her photo. For that matter, I could say the same for him. But nobody said anything or, you know, made it clear that they caught me taking their photo. So I can still claim to be like a ninja with these things.
Do you like look for anything specific when you take pictures, or literally just whatever you happen to capture?
It's not random, and it's not indiscriminate. but it's not specific. So there's not a specific look that I'm looking for. It's really just, you know, is this a story? Is this a character? Is this a face that deserves to be a painting? And there's no formula for that I'm able to articulate at this time. I think, you know, coming from my background, there's a lot that has to do with the statuesque, the history painting connection, if you like. So, you know, I've spent enough time in front of Rembrandt to probably have those images somewhere in my subliminal consciousness that says this is what a painting should look like. And that's probably an influence. But there's nothing that I could articulate about these people that I would say is what drew me to them.
I have a question. So are you interested in, you know, expanding this series to different locations or taking them out of the location so it's the portrait but it's not about the subway, or is that important that that connection is happening?
Very good question. Originally the idea was to kind of max out on New York at some point and then say, well, you know, if we spend some time in London or Paris, then there'll be another series for that. And I've already started taking those photos from being in London and Paris. You know, the same could happen with any major metropolitan city that has a commuter system of some kind. But the more I do this, the more it doesn't become about portraiture in a literal way. So it's really becoming more and more about people in flux, people in transition, journeying people. I think somewhere I've written a journeying collective of permeable solitudes, which is really what it is when you have a bunch of people who are sitting next to each other in a public space who have, you know, what we call the bubbles, right? And those bubbles can be pierced and punctured. And for me, it's very interesting to think about the points at which that happens. But more and more, I'm thinking about space, and I'm thinking about, you know, the human being in space. So it becomes less and less about them as individuals.
I have a question too. Even as the paintings are all portraits, there's a really strong formal. There's really strong formal elements that are kind of really commanding attention.
Yeah.
And I'm curious about like two things: the compositional choices, because they're so different. I mean, like some of them are kind of the same, and then others are just so
right.
completely different. So I'm curious about that. And then the other is the style, you know, and color choice and surface, you know, because some are very brilliant and look like they're really, you know, carefully detailed, and others are a little more kind of, you know, glazed and
right.
sfumato to not, you know, go too far into that.
Sure.
But, you know, like there's variations in those kinds of formal things that go beyond the subject, and I'm kind of curious about that.
Indeed. Well, each painting is approached differently than all the ones that I've done before. So I try as much as I can, you know, without delving into my subconscious. I'm not a meditator person, but each time I sit down to concentrate on a new work, it's as though nothing's happened before. And I try to go in a new direction with each one. Probably a big departure you'll see is this one, which is, you know, you have this strong formal element. And for me, being a big fan of formal abstraction, I love when that happens, and I would love to see it go more in that direction, because I have a love-hate relationship with representational painting. I think as any frustrated figurative painter would. So yeah, I certainly think that if I could get myself to break away from representationalism more, I would find it liberating. And I look at, you know, abstract painters with a lot of envy. It seems liberating to me to be able to just focus on, you know, the shapes and sizes and colors and textures of things on a painting without worrying about does it look like a person. So that is liberating to me. But it's funny because at the same time, the last 3 paintings that I did were the ones that are probably the most realistic. So that's simultaneous with that concern growing, if you like. So somehow I think in my twisted logic, I found more of that kind of focus on formal abstraction while focusing on the strict realism. Doesn't make sense, right?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure which the 3 are, but like I
Do you want me
see
to tell
that
you?
third one from the top.
Yeah.
You know, that one is moving towards abstract for me only because of how it's cropped and the colors,
Mhm.
you know?
The cropping has a lot to do with the original photograph. And also, there are, I mean, if there's one recurring theme you'll see is this cropped head to toe and, you know, basically tightly framed. So like this one, for example, this whole column, actually. But yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with the nature of the vantage point from which you look at people on the subway. And that's important to me. I mean, after all, these are about kind of bridging that gap between you guys and these people, with me or with the paintings as the conduit. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it's just,
Do you sketch everything in pencil first and then paint, or do you just start painting?
The drawings are mapped out on the panels in pencil. Sometimes it's done in paint. Usually it's in pencil. But it's not a sketching process. Like I'm not making decisions at that point. At least not big ones.
But you're not projecting the photos onto the canvas either.
No, the transposition method I'm using for these is a grid. I usually am a projection person, but my studio's not set up that way, and projection also has issues such as distortion, which you know, has to become something that if you're an artist and you're working with projections, you kind of have to own that element of what projection will do. If you use a projector, unless you are mathematically precise, you're going to get distortion, and that's going to be a thing that you have to be able to address in your work, I think. So I get around that by using a grid.
Some of the students here tonight are from the sophomore seminar class, and one of the things they do in that class is to identify a kindred spirit, an artist whose work might resonate with their own creative endeavors.
Okay.
Do you have a series of kindred spirits, portraiture artists who painted portraits who, you mentioned Rembrandt before, the cropping reminds me of some Degas imagery. There are artists whose work has inspired you over the years.
In a funny way, I don't look at other artists and see inspiration, I see competition. I know that sounds terrible, but you know, I stand in front of Rembrandt's paintings, and here's somebody who, for me, in the last 10 years of his life, reached the pinnacle of what oil paint on a flat surface can do. And I look at him, and I'm if I haven't seen a certain painting in a long time, and it's one of the ones that's very dear to me, I could be moved to tears. I'm one of those people. There's actually a medical condition for it. It's called Stendhal syndrome, where you can start giggling and crying by being moved by something that has beauty or whatever. So I diagnosed myself when I moved to New York and started making regular visits to the Met. But at the same time, I sit there and I'm thinking, you bastard, like this guy, who do you think you are to be so good? And to completely make the bar impossible, you know, a bit like Salieri to Mozart. That might be before your guys'. You should see Amadeus, the film by Milos Forman. Do they have film classes here?
Yes.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. I won't preach. But yeah, so other artists. I mean, yeah, it's kind of a loving affection, but also a kind of competitiveness. Maybe it's the way I was raised. I see a really great artist, and it looks to me like a bar that's been set that I need to aim for. But there's the other part of the question, which is, do I think my work is having a conversation with some of those art historical, not the artists themselves, but what their work is established in terms of formal this and that. And I would say, yeah, that would be nice. I'm not sure if I'm the person who gets to say that. I can tell you that, for example, when I make a painting, I'm thinking, would this be good enough, or would this accord by the same rules that Rembrandt was following, or Vermeer, or there's a lot of contemporary artists I could name drop, but it wouldn't mean anything because they're not that big. Because portraitists just don't get that famous right now. But yeah, I think that's the best answer I can give to that. Did I cover it? Okay.
What kind of paint do you use?
You want brand names or?
No, like tempera, acrylic.
Oh, these are oils.
Is that harder to work with than acrylic paint?
No, it's way easier. And don't let anyone tell you otherwise.
I've never used it, so I don't.
Here's the thing about acrylic: it dries really fast,
Yeah.
and when whatever you're working with fixes itself in position quickly, that means it's not going to let you make mistakes. So you have to work extremely quickly, which any artist should learn to do, especially if you're working in a visual medium. I think it's important to learn to work fast because you're going to develop a much closer synapse between your intention and what happens on the surface. But oils allow you to make mistakes. You can correct. You can smudge stuff out. You can erase very easily. It's a lot more forgiving than acrylic, unless you use a retardant, which, if you're doing that, then you have to honestly ask yourself, why am I working in acrylics? Yeah, these are oils.
Also, I know this is hard to answer, but how long do they take?
So many people have asked me that today. On average, like the median time, if I had to guess, for one of these paintings would be 18 hours of work. So that's from the time the first brush stroke goes on until the last one goes on. That said, there's as much as 2 or 3 hours of preparatory work for each painting, and that's mostly prepping photographs and combing through them and then doing all the color correction and the Photoshop stuff. And then prepping the surface. I mean, that's labor. It's not art.
Any other questions?
One. It's probably be a bit ignorant too, on some level, since I'm getting late, so you may have addressed this before, but I'm just thinking out loud here more than I am asking you a question, I think, on some level, but I'm looking at these, and they're fascinating. I love them. And this is my first glass of wine, but they're great. But they're all in the subway, right? Here, and so they're not necessarily part of some larger commentary on urban environment, right? It's part of this transportation system.
Is that a question?
No, I'm just
okay.
thinking out loud.
Yeah.
As I said, yeah. But the question's coming, I think,
okay.
on some level. So, as an historian here, I'm thinking that there wasn't, and I could be wrong, this is where the ignorance might come in, a fascination on sort of these faces, back when the trains or when people were being connected in that sort of sense historically. But there was that they emerged throughout the 20th century fascination with the urban environment in that kind of sense. So I'm just kind of wondering if you had something to say just about sort of, is this a part of the urban environment? Is this about sort of bringing people together in terms of a transportation network?
Yeah.
I don't know if there was really a fascination in terms of depicting faces like you are here.
You mean kind of like the Walker Evans thing?
Yes,
yeah.
yes, kind of like in that sense. As I don't know, maybe it's the new age, the technology with the media, with the cameras, that people can sort of do that, but this is something, I guess in the 19th century when trains were becoming more prevalent and more accessible to a wider sort of public.
And this was now a thing that people were seeing, was this image of the inside
they were seeing
of
people sort of huddled in and doing, these kind of things. So
Well, I have to kind of take your question and splice it between the two answers. One is, is that what my works are saying, and is that what me, the guy, is saying? So those are two different things. If you read that from the work, I would say that's completely valid. They can't separate themselves from that history of images of what transportation looks like on a human level. Am I interested in, as a person, am I interested in that? Yes, absolutely. And I don't know if you were here when I said it, but more and more I'm getting less interested in the portraiture aspect of it and more interested in the anthropological aspect of it. The human being in a closed space that is moving through a larger space in time, possibly beneath the surface of the earth or maybe high above it. I'm getting really into space right now, I'll tell you guys that. My next body of paintings may very well contain astronauts. That's just kind of a little obsession I'm cultivating on the side.
Well, speaking of space, and
yeah.
I didn't interrupt, but now whenever I sit down on the subway, now I make sure I close my legs because I'm being
the man-spreading thing.
Yes, I'm trying to. So speaking of how we move from one place to another, we're being controlled in a lot of ways as well. How we sort of
it's becoming part of the social commentary and consciousness.
Yeah. These folks are quite relaxed. Some of them.
That's probably some kind of coincidence.
Yeah.
Or not a coincidence, but like a correlation to whatever it is that draws me to use them for the paintings.
Yeah.
Do they look relaxed? I don't know. I feel like, for example, like this was one of the earlier photos I took. Sleeping people are sitting ducks for this. So at a certain point I decided I'm not going to use photos of people who are asleep. If they're reading and they're looking down and there's no way that they can catch me, even that started to feel a little bit safe.
Right.
So more and more as I start to look for subjects, I'm trying to take risks now. It's kind of that thing where like you get the guy that starts tagging a building in some back alley abandoned place at night. Hello. And then he starts venturing out into the day and seeing how close he can come to getting caught. So I think that's what's happening now with the source image gathering.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, let me see. What was the last photo I took? The most recent photo I think was her. And there were 5 shots, and one of them she was totally looking at me, which I'm not sure if she actually caught me photographing her, but she saw me. There was, some of these people, they never saw me. They were sleeping, these sisters. I'm not sure. She saw me. He might have seen me. That's my son. So, yeah. Sorry, I forgot what the question was.
No, I think you got it.
Okay.
Really no specific question.
In looking at these, I'm thinking about the last time I rode the subway and how you're really kind of in your own space because people just don't want to make eye contact.
No.
If you do, it could be dangerous. So you kind of retreat into your own space.
That's right.
And so in your own space, there's no posturing. It seems like these people are there themselves.
There's an earnestness there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you mentioned, the gastronauts, so they're in their own space, they're in a bubble. What other, individualized spaces can you envision that might inspire a series?
Is that an essay question?
Hmm?
Sounds like an essay question.
No, I'm just curious where you're going to go next.
I'm
going to do subways again, right?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, this series will continue, I think, until it reaches a certain quantitative conclusion, more than anything else. I could go on doing this for the rest of my career if I wanted to, and I'd never run out of subject matter. But at a certain point, I'm also suspecting that I'll stop feeling like I'm saying something new with each painting. The paintings are very different from one another, but here you have 21 of them. What would it look like if there were 2,100 or 21,000? would it, you know, like, would you still see them individually? I don't know. So at a certain point, I'll get sick of doing this and do something. It's really like, it becomes a labor question too. Like, already I think at the 10th one, I was sitting down and being like, oh God, you know, I want to try doing abstract, big canvases that I can just throw paint at. So, you know, I have my human limits to what I can do with this, but yeah, I think I'm gonna probably go in a more sci-fi direction from here. It's just like, if I'm being completely honest with myself about what my interests are.
I'm thinking ahead 20 years from now, hopefully I'm still alive and I get to see your show at MoMA.
Yeah.
You know, that one room would be the subways, and the next room might be, you know, people at funerals or people in church or synagogue or,
right.
You know, where they might be in their own space with their own feelings, and that the space may kind of unite the feelings, which creates a series.
I agree with you that human beings in space is probably is going to be the uniting factor of the paintings in my career. And I'll send you an invite to the MoMA retrospective. But yeah, I'm as interested as you are to see where it goes. That's the short answer.
Anything else?
We're good?
Cool. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.